What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and this is another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. What up, Chris?
What's going on, Ethan? How are you, man?
Well, Chris, I'm a little bit nervous. The Cavs got a tough stretch of games coming up. Might even be their toughest month of the season. It'll be joyous and merry in the holiday spirit if they can get past the Magic, Heat, Celtics, and then later in the month they got the Pelicans, Mavericks, and Bucks. What are your thoughts about this stretch for the Cavs?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just taking it in segments, and I think that's kind of how the Cavs are taking it. Even Isaac Okoro, Darius Garland, they were both talking about it earlier today after practice. They're looking at it as, okay, this is Orlando, this is Miami, and this is Boston. Like these 5 games, I don't want to say are a measuring stick for this team because they've got their own things that they have to figure out, and they might not be as far along as some of these other teams, but they're important for the Cavs. They have to show that they can consistently play at a high level against high caliber opponents. So far this year, Ethan, they're just 4-8 against opponents with winning records. Like if you're a team that says you're a contender in the Eastern Conference, you're a contender in the NBA. It's not only about beating up on the Pistons and the Wizards and the Toronto Raptors and those caliber teams. You have to find a way to show yourself and show everybody else that you belong in that same conversation with these other teams. And the only way that you do that is by consistently playing at a high level against them.
Let's start with Wednesday's game against Orlando. It's their last home game for a little while, but the good news is the Cavs might be getting Dean Wade back as he's questionable with his ankle injury and he's been practicing this week. How important is it going to be to have Dean Wade back in this next stretch?
I feel like you always set me up, Ethan, to be president of the Dean Wade fan club here.
Hey, I got to be the president of the Craig Porter Jr. fan club. You get Dean Wade.
You did that to yourself, though.
No, you were president of the Dean Wade fan club since we did the George Niang podcast.
All I do is point out how impactful he is because everybody just wants to look at one side of the court. But here, multiple sources tell me that Dean's going to play tomorrow against Orlando, provided he doesn't have a setback following shoot around and provided he doesn't have a setback in pregame warmups. So they are planning for him to be back in the lineup tomorrow night. And I do think it's a good thing for the Cavs. Look, I understand completely the offensive limitations. Like, he's probably in maybe the second percentile, which is terrible, but maybe the second percentile in terms of offensive impact. But he's in like the 90th percentile of defensive impact. And you simply cannot overlook that. He brings size. He brings physicality. He brings enough foot speed to match up with 1s, 2s, and 3s, sometimes even 4s, depending on that particular matchup. And look, numbers can lie. They don't tell the whole story. But the Cavs, and we've talked about this on the podcast, Ethan, the Cavs with Dean Wade on the court in terms of defensive rating, 103, which is basically like the Minnesota Timberwolves. And the Timberwolves have a great defense. We've talked about that.
Really good defense.
Without Dean Wade, their defensive rating is 112.7, which is basically the Atlanta Hawks. And everybody knows that Atlanta is not a very good defensive team. So that's the difference in how the Cavs play when they do have Dean. Now, I'm also very curious to see how JB Bickerstaff is going to handle it. Because in the past, when Dean hasn't been in the starting lineup, he's been kind of like an afterthought. So it's going to be up to JB to find some minutes for Dean throughout when he's not in that starting line. It's really, really easy when he's in the starting lineup. You put him in the starting lineup, you have a set rotation, but now you have to find different combinations and different lineups to have him still be involved because they need what he brings on the defensive end of the floor, especially against an Orlando team that is very long, very athletic, and very grimy, similar to the Cavs of last year.
Yeah, I agree. I think he is going to be really crucial in helping guard Paolo Banchero in the second unit.
Franz Wagner.
Yeah, Franz Wagner as well. And I think he'll also just be able to help this defensive second unit, especially if they do go with putting Evan at the 5. Having Dean Wade back is gonna take a little bit of that pressure off of Evan as well. And I think it's just like we've talked about his offense, and he's been shooting at practice. He's been getting that work in. So it's possible that they need him to also contribute on the offensive end, depending on what kind of night the Cavs are having.
Theoretically, Ethan, he is a space the floor forward. He is a catch and shoot threat. He is a guy who can knock down threes, but like he just hasn't played to that level this year on the offensive end. So I understand why some people find it hard to buy into him creating value for this team and having impact for this team when they see box scores with 0 points or where they see box scores with 0 of 3, 0 of 4 from 3 point range and stuff like that. All I'm saying is, like, that's not his primary role. Spacing the floor, fine. Like, that's one thing. Just being a threat out there on the court, that's one thing. But it's not his primary role to go out there and score like 15 to 20 points a night. Even 10 points is asking a lot for somebody like Dean, who doesn't really get a lot of shots, who doesn't really get a lot of touches, who certainly doesn't have plays called for him.
Yeah, I don't think there's an expectation of him doing anything offensively. Just
So then why do people get so butthurt when he only scores 0 points or 2 points or something like that?
when I was a part of that group earlier in the season, it was more so like you think about somebody playing 33 minutes and it's like, how did you not score once? Like, it feels impossible. But if it's not your role, if you're not getting the ball as much on the offensive end, if your job is literally just to take the defender out of the play, then that makes it more viable. But just to the naked eye, and I was once that earlier in the season, being new to the beat. It was like, this dude's been playing 33 minutes a night. Why on earth is he averaging 2, 3 points a game?
I mean, I don't mean to bring up PTSD here with this name. Dylan Windler and I have had many, many conversations in the past, and Dylan's no longer with the Cavs. He was one of their 3 first-round picks in the 2019 draft. It went Darius Garland, Dylan Windler, and then Kevin Porter Jr. So at one point, the Cavs were excited about Dylan, his potential. They thought he was going to be a really, really good fit. He was a theoretical 3 and D type guy. And him and I, in the past, he's now playing for the New York Knicks on a two-way contract. But we had multiple conversations about just like the challenge of that specific role where you get maybe a couple of shot opportunities per game. And if you don't make them, and they're expecting you to make them, it's like, what are you doing on the court offensively? You know what I mean? And it's like so much pressure on those couple of shots that if you don't make them, it becomes more magnified. And I think Dean is in the same kind of situation where he's only going to get a couple of shots a night. And that's really, really difficult to ask him to make those consistently when he's not in the rhythm, when he's not touching the ball, when he's not involved offensively. And it's just like you're expecting him to just go out and make those shots. And when he doesn't, it just looks a lot worse and feels a lot worse. It's a tough role to play, is basically what I'm saying.
Moving on to the next topic. What do you think will be the most important key to the Orlando game, and which is more important on defense? Stopping Paolo in the paint or slowing down the guards on the transition offense that they love to run?
I think it's that. But I think what it goes back to is the Cavs have to limit their turnovers, right? It starts there. If they're going to throw the ball around like candy in a parade, the way that Darius Garland has at times this year, he's second in the NBA in turnovers. That's way too much. Way too much for the supposed engine of the offense, the supposed one of the leaders of the team, one of the leaders of the offense. That's going to fuel their fast break. And it's like the Cavs are giving up about 18 points per game off their turnovers. So these live ball turnovers are putting their defense in a bind. And if you're going to turn the ball over like that against Orlando, good luck. So to me, yeah, it starts with slowing them down in transition, making them have to work against your stingy half court defense. But that ties into taking care of the basketball, valuing possessions, and understanding in a game like that You cannot have lackadaisical passes. You cannot play with a nonchalance. And too often, Darius and the Cavs have gotten caught up in that, where they just have these silly, lazy turnovers that are just completely perplexing and out of character.
Yeah, and I think the guards, especially for Orlando, ignite that offense on the defensive end of the ball. So turnovers and minimizing those are going to be a huge thing because allowing for the Magic to get out in transition and even hit threes in transition, they're so good at that and as good on the interior. And I think the most important thing for me is that the Cavs have struggled with dribble drive players like De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Halliburton, and even Steph Curry on occasion. So I think it'll be really, really interesting to see the concepts they throw at Jalen Suggs and Cole Anthony while also dealing with two big men in the paint, just like the Cavs.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, Darius kind of hinted at it a little bit today following practice that he feels like their point of attack defense has kind of put their bigs in a precarious position where they're over helping or they're relying too much on those guys to erase mistakes or protect the paint. And it's like one of the things that stood out in that Atlanta win where the Cavs held the explosive Hawks, who came into that game averaging about 120 points, to 105. Darius took the challenge against Trey Young. He took that personally. And then Donovan Mitchell was matching up with DeJounte Murray. And then other times it was other guys matching up with DeJounte Murray. But it needs to be that for the Cavs on the perimeter. It can't be like, hey, we've got Jared Allen, we've got Evan Mobley. They can erase mistakes. So we can lack a little bit when it comes to intensity on the perimeter. No, 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 no. It has to be you taking on that challenge. It has to be you accepting that kind of matchup and everything that that entails, even if that means that you have to expend a little bit more energy on the defensive end of the floor and you don't have as much on the offensive end. Like that's what it's going to take for this group. And Darius was kind of hinting at it a little bit following practice, just saying that, we've put our bigs in rotation a little bit too often and we have to prevent that from happening. So it'll be interesting to see just how Darius and Donovan specifically, Ethan, at the point of attack, approach those kinds of matchups.
I think it's also interesting to think about like those guys know how good the players on the bench are defensively. Like that's the counter that you have. Like the Cavs bench is really good at defense with Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade on the bench. And then you have the starters who are mainly offense. And then you look at Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, like, oh, those are our defensive guys. Because you don't really think of Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, and Max Strus, who has gotten better on the defensive end as defensive players. So I think it's something that they can't rely on when those guys on the bench come in the game that they're going to get the stops that they need. No, you have to get the stops when you're on the court too, so that the league can grow exponentially rather than just as we saw against the Pistons, as we saw against the Blazers. Like when the other guys come in, the lead's gonna drop because they can play defense, but they're still gonna go on a little bit of a run if they're not scoring. So against the Magic is going to be really, really important for them to just lock in on the defensive end as much as on the offensive end. But now, based on the teams we talked about a little bit earlier, the Magic, Heat, Celtics, Pelicans, Mavericks, and Bucks, which team poses the biggest challenge for the Cavs? And are there teams on this stretch that the Cavs could emulate as they progress? I'm going to go first on this one just because I think there's an easy answer for the hardest team to face. And I want to get your opinion on what I have to say as my second pick. So I think the easy answer is the Celtics. I also think they're the team that the Cavs should be looking to kind of emulate because you think they have two primary scorers in Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum. And then you look across and they have big man just like Kristaps and Evan Mobley, who you think is like a unicorn, who can do the defensive end on the perimeter, in the paint, all those things. But I think if the Cavs can comprise a system like the Celtics and their format, they could find more success. But if I had to pick another team that would be most difficult for the Cavs in this stretch of games, I'd say the Mavericks because they're able to create so much success in the perimeter in mid-range game. And as we talked about, the Cavs starting rotation doesn't really have a lot of perimeter defense prowess. And I don't know if the Cavs have the match for Kyrie and Luka in that end. I mean, Kyrie is the most creative player with the ball in his hands of all time. So it's a tall task for almost anybody, but those are my thoughts when it comes to the hardest teams they're going to have to play, the hardest players they're going to have to guard, and who they should emulate. What are your thoughts, Chris?
All right, I'm going to preface this and say that I fully understand that what happened last year doesn't mean as much when it comes to this year because teams are different, because they're playing at a different level, there are different matchups, there are new players on both sides. But the Cavs have been able to match up with the Celtics. They went 3-1 against them last year. They won in Boston. So it's just like stylistically, the way that the Celtics play is something that the Cavs have been able to handle. Now, in saying that, they do switch a lot on the defensive end of the floor, and switchy defenses have been problematic for the Cavs, and it's something that they've been working through the last couple of days at practice, trying to stay away from ISO basketball in those situations, which is difficult because switchy defenses kind of lend you as an offense into attacking in isolation because it can create mismatches. And you start looking at it saying, ooh, I'm Darius Garland, I'm Donovan Mitchell, I got a bag, and I've got a power forward or a center defending me. That's really enticing. Or, hey, look, Evan Mobley against a small. Hey, look, Jared Allen against a guard. Let's capitalize on that. So switchy defenses can be problematic for the Cavs. But the Cavs have the bigs to match up with Boston. And stylistically, like the things that the Celtics do on the offensive end of the floor, the Cavs, look, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, great players individually. Derek White, same thing. Kristaps Porzingis, same thing. Drew Holiday as well. So there are different components to these Celtics, but the Cavs feel internally that that is a team based on personnel that they match up better with. Miami is the answer here because number one, the Cavs lost by like 50 points against the B team of the Miami Heat at home. Now, that was a bit of a schedule loss and stuff like that. But beyond that, Ethan, they've won twice in Miami over the last decade. It is a very, very difficult place for the Cavs to win, especially given all of the distractions. It's Miami life. Are you kidding me? Like, that's the greatest home court advantage that the Heat can possibly have. And like the Heat are so tough, so physical. They run such good stuff on the offensive end. They put your defense in a bind over and over and over again. So I think the toughest matchup based on history, based on what we've already seen this year, based on personnel on the other side of the floor, to me, the toughest matchup for the Cavs is Miami. They just do not match up very well against the Heat. They do not play well in Miami. 2 wins in the last 10 years is pretty telling.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go too far because when we come back, we're going to discuss if Cavs head coach JB Bickerstaff is in the hot seat. Before then, remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and I by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com /Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from myself and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through subtext. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Chris, we're finally going to answer the question that all fans want to know. Do you get the feeling that JB Bickerstaff is on the hot seat?
Well, look, I think it's warm underneath him for sure. Because anytime, Ethan, you have a team that comes into a season with high expectations, a team that comes off of the playoff series that they had, playoff series that raised questions about their direction, a playoff series that raised questions about the coach, a playoff series that raised questions about their personnel and the kind of upgrades that they needed to make moving into the future. And then on top of that, comes out and is only 11-9 so far this year and isn't even in the top 6 of the Eastern Conference, a locked in playoff spot. Yeah, I mean, you look at the coach for sure. And you say, why are things not going the way that we expected them to? What is holding this team back? And I mean, it's hard to say talent is holding this team back, right? Because they got 4 of the 50 top players in the entire NBA. Because early on this season, Donovan Mitchell was playing like an MVP candidate. And look, there are a bunch of reasons why the Cavs are 11-9 at this point. There are a lot of reasons why the Cavs have underachieved to this point. Part of it's injuries, part of it is trying to integrate new pieces, part of it is tweaking systems on the offensive and defensive end of the floor, and it takes time to master those kinds of things. Part of it is a brutal schedule early on in the year. There are a bunch of reasons why things have gone the way that they have for the Cavs. But JB Bickerstaff in the offseason was tasked with one thing specifically: make this offense more dynamic, make this offense more explosive. And for the Cavs to have the talent upgrades that they made this offseason and seemingly having the pieces that were needed for that offense to take the rise and still be ranked 23rd, like JB hasn't to this point done what this front office asked of him this past offseason. So if the Cavs continue to struggle offensively, if that's going to be the thing that holds them back, it would be understandable for the front office to look at and say, okay, we got you the pieces. We think we have the talent. It might be your tactics, it might be your schemes that are holding us back from reaching our potential on the offensive end of the floor. So, yeah, I think it's warm underneath him because he's a coach of a team that is underachieving at this point in the season.
Yeah, Chris, I think you could feel it in the air that there was tension after the Blazers game, regardless of what JB or the players might have said. We recall the team meeting that was had last year against Milwaukee after that stretch. Well, that was the Bucks, and yet they had to take an extended period to reassess themselves against a rebuilding Blazers team and nearly lost to the 17 straight loss Pistons the game after. It was looking ugly for a minute there, but that leads me to my next question. You said earlier in the season that you didn't think that the Cavs would move on from JB until the postseason if they didn't get past the first round. How important is the next stretch of games in the decision of upper management to continue to trust in JB Bickerstaff or to go a different direction?
It's still only December 5th, Ethan. We're still only a month into this thing. And the Cavs have had 8 different starting lineups. Their starting group that they expected on opening night has only been together for 10 or 11 games. There are so many different injuries to key players that this group has been trying to navigate. So I guess what I'm saying is that this front office is smart. This front office understands the things that are going on. This front office understands the circumstances tied to this team not reaching expectations at the beginning of the year thus far. Like they could turn it around, right? They could surprise everybody and they could go 3-2 during this stretch or 4-1 during this stretch. Who knows? It's the NBA. You never say never. I don't expect that. I think that's unlikely based on what I've seen from this team and based on the way that they've performed against these caliber opponents, but it could happen. I just don't sense this front office making an emotionally rash decision like that, given everything that JB has had to deal with early on in this season. Like, I think this front office is smart enough to understand the how and the why of this slow start. And I get the sense that they're willing to give him a little bit of time to try and work through these issues, to try and learn from his failures, to try and make some adjustments and try and make this team better. Because, like, this is the kind of team that the way that they're constructed, Ethan, feels like they're capable of getting better as the season goes on. More time with Max Strus, more time together with this starting lineup, more time together with Darius and Donovan Mitchell. Like all of these things, I think the front office knew were going to take time. But like if they're still hovering around 500 at the end of December, if they're still hovering around 500 around January, it's not like they have a lot of personnel capability to make moves. And I think it would be considered a doomsday decision, and I'm not sure that the Cavs want to go that direction when it comes to JB. But if they're forced to because they feel like this team is not reaching its potential and JB's not maximizing this group with the clock ticking, with the expectations coming into this year, with the pressure on them because of the Donovan Mitchell situation, I wouldn't completely rule it out.
They have 12 more games this month. And I didn't even bring up opponents that they should beat, like the Bulls, the Jazz, the Hawks, and the Rockets, because we just assume that those are gimme games. But we saw the last two games that anything is possible with these Cavs. So if they end up going like 4-8, over this 12 game stretch to end the month and end up below 500, then I think it'll be time for them to truly consider what they're doing and if this is the right fit for everyone involved. And that includes the players. Like, that's just how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say, Ethan, is that when it comes to trying to improve the roster, like if that's what the front office looks at and says, okay, like let's look at the personnel. Let's evaluate that first. Let's see what we can do in that realm. They don't have a ton of first round draft capital moving into the future because all of that was used basically on the Donovan Mitchell trade. Now they have some future second round picks, and they could theoretically combine those with the contract of Dean Wade and the contract of Ricky Rubio. And if a team wants some salary cap relief for one of their players that is a veteran on a team that's going nowhere, like Washington, like Chicago, like Detroit, they're not getting in Zach LaVine or anything along those lines, but is there like a secondary player that would make sense for them to go out and get that would plug a personnel related hole? Like, again, if that's what they look at and say that's required, I just don't know that there's a great roadmap for them to go out and actually make that kind of acquisition because they just don't have a lot of enticing tradable assets. At least ones that they would want to move outside of their top 8 in the rotation or outside of the top 6 in their rotation. So I think for them, like if they feel like this team is underachieving, there's probably an understanding that it's easier to make a move in the other direction when it comes to the coach and saying, okay, can we get another voice in here? Okay, can we get somebody who's going to do things a little bit differently offensively, a little bit differently on the defensive end of the floor? Can we get somebody who is just going to put a jolt in this team in a different kind of way? Because JB, like his voice isn't being heard as much. Like, I'm not saying that that's what's happening right now, and I'm not predicting that that's what's going to happen. But I think when you're a front office and you're looking at improvements in season, if you don't feel like you have the pieces to go out and make improvements in personnel, you don't just sit on your hands, right? You look at the next thing that you could potentially do. Here's another question that I have for you, Ethan, before we go. What would you consider successful over these next 5 games? 2 against Orlando, 2 against Boston, and that 1 against Miami in between. Like, what is success for you over the next 5 games? What do you want to see from this group?
I think I want them to win against the Heat. I want them to win one against the Celtics at least. And I want them to win against Orlando at home on Wednesday.
So 3-2.
So, yeah,
Whew.
3-2.
Wow.
That's what I want from this team that says they have playoff aspirations against teams that they're going to have to see again. Like, these are not teams that are just going to be going away. You don't have 1, 2 games against them like the Western Conference. You are going to have to see them again. And in these moments right now where you're thinking, like, this team needs a jolt, this team needs a stretch of games, like, there's 7 wins in their last 10 games. So they've only lost 3 games in the last 10 games. That's not bad, but with what just happened in the last 2 games, it feels like they need some morale pickup. It seems like they need some more ugly wins. It doesn't have to be pretty, like they said, but being able to pull out 3 of the next 5 seems realistic to me for a team that has been talking about they have the arsenal, they have the roster, they have the depth, and they're getting the depth that they need back outside of Karis LeVert, who's still out against the Magic on Wednesday. But yeah, 3-2. That's where I'm going.
Boy, I think that's a lot to ask. I think the Cavs would be thrilled with 2-3, understanding how daunting this stretch is. I mean, this is a gauntlet. Number one, it's on the road for 4 of the 5. Number two, it's basically a series setup baseball style against the Boston Celtics, and it's very difficult to play in that building. And the Magic are just rolling right now. They're second in the Eastern Conference, probably third now because Milwaukee won earlier tonight. But like I think honestly, they would take 2-3 and they would smile because that would still allow them after this trip to be above 500.
I hear you. You're probably right. I just have higher
I
expectations
get it.
for this team, I guess. But with that, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with myself and Chris by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from myself and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.